Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsom, and I'm here to break down UFC St. Louis, which goes down this weekend. On Saturday night, we've got a heavyweight main event between the Black Beast, Derrick Lewis, versus the Brazilian, who's trying to make his way up into the heavyweight rankings, and a win here will absolutely boost him up those rankings for sure, with Rodrigo Nascimento. The card itself is, it's a little bit hit and miss from a name perspective, but, we say this time and time again. It's these types of cards that usually deliver really exciting fights. So we'll see what goes down. It's good that there's going to be a crowd there. It's a UFC fight night that's not an Apex event, so the UFC are on the road, travelling again for a fight night. There is going to be a crowd there, so there's definitely that positive to take away from it. And like I say, I do think that, there's a few fights on this card that I feel are going to be really, really good. So, yeah, looking forward to breaking it down, looking forward to getting into the fights. But just before we do, if you do want to jump into the action on Saturday night, the betting action, make sure you go to MMAplay365.com. Under every subscription, whether that's a next event subscription, a monthly subscription, or an annual subscription, you'll get all the handicapper betting advice from myself, along with the Bayes AI predictions, a percentage prediction for every possible outcome on every single fight on the entire card, for every UFC event as well, and that's with our AI prediction software. From my perspective, I am on a little bit of a cold streak at the minute, but, it's normal. Every single long-term winner in this game, in the handicapper game, goes through these cold streaks. I'm just on mine. And, it's never a bad time to actually jump on during a cold streak because, like I said, long-term winners go on cold streaks, which means that at some point that hot streak is going to start. And I'm just biding my time and waiting for that hot streak. So, yeah, even if you don't want to follow the handicapping advice right now within the packages, like I said, Bayes AI is still firing solid. A great event again last week for Bayes AI. So, yeah, jump into the action. That's MMAplay365.com. But now the introduction's over, the promotion's over, let's get into the breakdowns, and we start as always with the main event. As I've mentioned in the introduction, it's Derrick Lewis versus Rodrigo Nascimento in the heavyweight division. And these heavyweight main events, I'm always really mixed on them because most of the time we don't need that main event to happen because the fights don't go 5 rounds. However, there are always exceptions to the rule, like always with MMA. It can be unpredictable. Like the fight between, I think I said this last time, with Gaziev and Rosenstruik. That fight, well, it did finish, but it was heading towards 5 rounds. Of course, the famous Francis Ngannou versus Derrick Lewis fight, that went 3 rounds. That went to a decision as well. So although that wasn't a 5-rounder, it still went to a decision which nobody predicted. So again, I'm going to say the same thing here. Look, I don't think this fight goes 5 rounds. I'd be very surprised if it did. It's a good stylistic clash between Lewis and Nascimento. And look, the thing is with Derrick Lewis, we know exactly what to expect from Lewis. He's a ridiculously hard hitter. I think it's something like 22 knockouts from his 27 wins in MMA. One of the hardest hitters that we've ever seen in combat sports. And it still stands. If he connects with Rodrigo Nascimento clean with one of his punches, then that's it. The night's done. But what's really interesting from a betting perspective here is that Derrick Lewis is, because he's got other holes and flaws in his game outside of obviously his power, like his striking's not super technical, he's got deficiencies in his wrestling and grappling to an extent as well. What you normally find with Derrick Lewis is he comes into these fights as an underdog because he's got that puncher's chance, although a ridiculously elevated puncher's chance. And then his opponent's like minus 200, minus 300, minus 400. But then it's a super risky betting against Derrick Lewis because you're paying chalk or juice and you've got this stupidly hard power hitter on the other side. And I've been caught out by this a couple of times. The Volkov fight springs to mind, Curtis Blades as well. And that's where it's a real risk because you're betting the big favourite against the power puncher, and it only takes one punch, especially in the heavyweight division as well. But here it's different. Lewis is coming into this fight as a favourite, so he's now a favourite in this fight where he has that puncher's chance. Like, from a technical perspective, in my opinion, Rodrigo Nascimento is a better fighter. He's a more technical striker. He has more volume, puts out more strikes in the fight. One thing both of these fighters have got in common is they both get hit more than they land, but at least Nascimento is putting out more volume. Then when you look at the wrestling, I wish Nascimento's wrestling was a little bit better and he went to it a little bit more, because his jiu-jitsu game is world class. And again, on the mat with Rodrigo Nascimento on top of Lewis, that for me is the biggest gap in skill. Yes, Lewis has got these bursts of explosions where, I think he jokes and calls himself the best blue belt on the planet in jiu-jitsu, but he has these explosions even when his opponents mounted him, where he will just explode back up to his feet, but they're not a technical get-up. They are explosions where he's expending energy, and again, as a heavyweight in a 5-round fight. And also, when you've got somebody as good as, like a legit BJJ black belt like Nascimento, if you're exploding, what stops Nascimento from just going really light in those moments, floating the hips, and then, as Lewis is trying to stand back up, taking his back. So Nascimento's got a real advantage on the mat here. And like I say, from a technical striking perspective, he's better. Wrestling, I still think, you would give the advantage to Nascimento. So I kind of feel that Nascimento's the better fighter, but then you go back to the power. It's like one shot here and it's done. And that's what makes every single Derrick Lewis fight tricky. And look, Derrick Lewis has, had a successful career in the UFC of just knocking pretty much everybody out, apart from obviously the one or two exceptions in there. He's taken some losses, but he's taken the losses against the fighters that, have been defensively aware and have also been the better technical fighter. And that's where I think that Nascimento kind of fits in. I like Nascimento, the fact that he's at American Top Team as well. He's training with Jairzinho Rozenstruik, who is, a legit kickboxer, real good power as well, just like Lewis, but Rozenstruik's a better technical fighter. So I feel like Nascimento's preparing himself in the right way here, And like I said, at some point, I do feel that the skill set of Nascimento is going to put him into the rankings. Not quite sure how high he goes into the rankings, but this is a winnable fight for him. If he doesn't get caught with a hard shot, I think he can get takedowns. I think he can get on top of Lewis. I think he can ride minutes of the rounds, potentially find a finish on the mat as well. So for those reasons, and I always hate going against the power of Derrick Lewis, but I'm picking Rodrigo Nascimento to win this fight. And in the next fight in the co-main event, this is one of the better fights on the entire card. We've got Joaquin Buckley versus Nursulton Ruziboev. Both of these fighters making quick turnarounds, especially Joaquin Buckley. I was personally on Joaquin Buckley against Vicente Luque. Really, really liked that spot for him. Got him in an underdog spot as well. Not quite as good as some people. I think I got the plus 100. There were people out there getting up to like plus 120, plus 125. But still, I got the plus money on Buckley. Really liked him. Cashed, finished, beautiful. Now he comes into this fight against Ruziboev. And I'll say this straight away, this is a very, very different fight for Buckley. And I think it's a more difficult fight for Luque. And some people might think, oh, you're crazy. Vicente Luque is a beast. He's an animal. He was, one of the highest regarded fighters in the division. And look, I get that. But the Vicente Luque that Buckley fought, a few weeks ago is not the Vicente Luque that everybody's remembering from a couple of years ago. And that's one of the reasons why I bet Buckley against Luque, because I knew that wasn't the Luque we were getting. If I knew that we were getting the Luque from a couple of years ago, there's absolutely no way I'd have bet Buckley. But the thing is with Ruziboev is new blood in the division. He's tall, he's like 6'5", ridiculous height. He's coming down in weight as well to welterweight from middleweight. So this dude is going to be an absolutely huge welterweight. And I still think that we're yet to see the best from Ruziboev. Like when he came into the UFC on his UFC debut against Bruno Ferreira, I cashed Ruziboev. I think it was like plus 175, which was ridiculous. This kid's talented. Like his striking's good, his wrestling's good, his grappling's good. Defensive wrestling is a little bit of a hole, I think, or at least it was before he came into the UFC. He hasn't had to deal with getting taken down yet in the UFC, but outside of the UFC, it did look like he could get taken down a little bit easy. But his submission attacking off his back was, high level. He could sweep, he could get back up to his feet. So Ruziboev is a talented fighter, and I also love that he's training in Philly as well with Daniel Gracie, Pat Sabatini, Sean Brady, because that camp are real high-level grapplers and really good wrestlers as well. And I just feel that that's just a perfect fit for Ruziboev with the style that he has as a fighter. So, yeah, look, I think this is a really good fight because on the other side, you've got Buckley, who is this short powerhouse. Again, he's a fighter that's come down from the middleweight division as well. Packs a ton of power. He's developing his game from fight to fight as well. He adds in a bit of wrestling, a bit of grappling. Obviously, he finished Luque with ground and pound. Yes, it was Luque that sort of pulled Buckley on top of him, but you know, Buckley stayed on the mat and did what he needed to do against a fighter that in Luque who does have a good jiu-jitsu game. So, yeah, look, Buckley's a real explosive fighter that's getting better as well. But the one thing that I looked at here is, look, both fighters have come down in middleweight where they looked really big at middleweight. So Buckley has had a few fights at welterweight now, so we know what to expect with Buckley, but Ruziboev we don't. So I actually went back and I had a look at, you know, what I could find with Ruziboev. Has he ever fought at welterweight before? And it turns out like almost 50% of his professional MMA career, the early 50% was fought at welterweight, and then he moved up to middleweight, and you know that latter part of his career up to this point has been at middleweight. So the other thing that I noticed is the majority of his losses that he's taken as a professional MMA fighter have been at welterweight. So again, that was a bit of a concern. Was the weight cuts to welterweight causing him durability issues? Was he getting rocked, wobbled, knocked out? And it turns out, apart from his first ever loss, which was like over 10 years ago, he hasn't looked like he's had durability issues from going down in welterweight. So how is he losing these fights at welterweight? Well, he was getting taken down, he was getting controlled a little bit, and it just seemed that although his gas tank wasn't terrible, it did wear on him a little bit down at welterweight. So my initial thoughts in regards to this is, I kind of feel like he moved up into the middleweight division because the weight cuts were bad. Maybe he was cutting weight the wrong way. He didn't have access to the right dietitians and nutritionists. But now he's in the UFC. Now he's at a good team. Now he's surrounded by different people. I do feel like he's going to have the experts in the dietitian and nutritionist world to help him get down to welterweight in a good way, that it's not going to deplete him as a fighter. And I feel that's what we're going to get in this fight. Now, as how they match up stylistically, like I say, I feel that, look, Ruziboev can't let Joaquin Buckley inside of boxing range too often, because Buckley will fire hard shots, and again it's going to be one of those where it might only take one or two clean punches and Ruziboev will be knocked out cold. So Ruziboev's got to fight smart here. But what's good for Ruziboev is the fact he's so tall, he's so long. There's going to be an opposite stance here because Buckley's a southpaw. Ruziboev, again, we haven't seen it too much in the UFC because his fights haven't gone on for that long, but he does have a good kicking game, so he's going to have the open body to kick at Buckley. It's not at the apex, so he's going to have the bigger cage to work with as well. And I kind of feel like there's a little bit of upside here on Ruziboev. Like I said, you can't take for granted that he's not going to get a hit, and with Buckley coming into range, that's always going to be a danger. But if Ruziboev isn't liking what he's seeing with the striking, he's always got the option to try and take Buckley down. And again, I think Ruziboev on top of Buckley is going to be a bit of a problem. Will Buckley get up? Potentially. Like I said, he's improving those sides of his game, but I think Ruziboev could do good work on top of Buckley. But even on the feet, the length and the power that Ruziboev has, like I've spoken about Buckley's power, but Ruziboev's got that deceptive power as well. I think that he could potentially land something straight down the middle and crack Buckley, potentially knock him out. So I feel like it's a very volatile fight in regards to a finishing perspective. But for me, I kind of feel like Ruziboev is the fighter with the multiple paths to victory, because he's the more likely wrestler and grappler here and more likely to have success there. So for those reasons, I'm picking Nursulton Ruziboev to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a volatile fight as well for sure. We've got Alonzo Menifield versus Carlos Ulberg. And again, it's very, very similar. Well, I was going to say it's very similar to what I mentioned with Derrick Lewis. And I kind of feel like I'd be doing Menifield a bit of a disservice there, because Menifield, I do think, has got some real good technical qualities about his striking. But the better technical striker here is absolutely Carlos Ulberg. You know, he's the one with the kickboxing background, training with the likes of Israel Adesanya. You can see that Carlos Ulberg is a very, very technically sound fighter, and he's got power as well. And, you know, at this weight division, you know, most of the fighters are going to carry power. But talking of power, Alonzo Menifield He's got insane power. I don't know how the dude even makes the weight. He's just absolutely huge. There's not an ounce of fat on him. Like, he's a very, very big built fighter. And the thing is, he can carry cardio pretty well as well. Like, for as big and powerful as he is, he does spend a lot of time in the clinch up against the cage trying to pin his opponents there, and you would expect that lactic acid to start flowing through his muscles, and then he starts to get tired. But to be fair to him, his cardio is very good for how he's physically built. Like, these guys that are physically built like Menifield normally, like I say, don't have the best cardio, but Menifield is an exception to that rule. So with this fight, I think it's a fight that's won and lost on the feet striking. I think Menifield might try and pin Ulberg against the cage a little bit, but he's got to be careful because Ulberg's got power in close with the elbows, uppercuts, short punches. So I don't think it's a place where Menifield should be hanging out too often. But then at range, I don't think that's the best place for Menifield either. And then we start to get to, the side of the fence that I'm currently coming down on, because I don't think wrestling and grappling Ulberg is going to be, the MO of Menifield. Look, he might get a takedown, and that might, he might have worked the wrestling and grappling because of Ulberg's style, but I just don't. It wouldn't shock me to see a takedown from Menifield, but I just don't think that we see this relentless wrestling approach where, Menifield is taking Ulberg down consistently, or maybe he just needs one takedown and stays on top of him for that round. But again, I think Ulberg's going to have a level of get up game here because he's not got like this legit BJJ black belt on top of him, because Menifield is predominantly a striker. So that's why I kind of think that the fight's going to be won and lost on the feet, and that's where I think Ulberg, as long as he minds his P's and Q's, similar to what I said with Rodrigo Nascimento, if Ulberg doesn't mind his P's and Q's and gets caught by Menifield, then yeah, it'll shut his lights off. But Ulberg, like I said, his striking's really good, defensively as well. So I kind of feel he stays out the way of those big shots from Menifield and just puts his real good technical striking on display here. And, either finishes Menifield with these good strikes or just outpoints him throughout the rounds and wins a decision. So for those reasons, I'm picking Carlos Ulberg to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Diego Ferreira versus Mateusz Rebecki. And this fight is going to be a grappler's delight. And to be fair, even before the grappling, it could be a striker's delight as well. Like, this fight is going to be really, really good. Mateusz Rebecki is, at the minute, everybody's very high on him. You can see why. He's a solid striker, but then he's got this powerful wrestling game. His grappling is legit. Competed multiple times in, no-gi grappling tournaments, won a ton of them as well. So the dude is the complete package. In regards to cardio, his cardio's good as well, especially for how he can wrestle at times. Like we saw in his UFC debut, he did tire a little bit, but he put on like a Colby Covington, Merab Dewar-Lishvili type of relentless wrestling performance. It was just takedown after takedown after takedown. So unless you have got that elite level cardio, you've got to expect a fighter to tire with that type of game plan and style that they're, displaying inside the cage. But then on the other side here, you've got Diego Ferreira, who is predominantly a grappler, high-level BJJ, real high-level BJJ, that's wrestling is pretty much caught up to it, and then his striking's caught up to the wrestling. So again, it's another very well-rounded fighter. So it's going to be interesting to see which fighter really starts to push the pace and which fighter's on top, because for as good as and as fun as the striking's going to be with both fighters winging big strikes, I do feel that the wrestling's going to play a key factor in this fight. I think both fighters will want to be on top of their opponent, and this is where it gets interesting, because for as good as both fighters are with the jiu-jitsu, I kind of feel that the offensive jiu-jitsu of both fighters will outwork the defensive jiu-jitsu of both fighters, which in layman's terms just basically means whoever gets on top is going to be able to do the best work. And I just don't think that their opponent is going to be able to consistently get up time after time after time, and eventually whoever's relentlessly wrestling or whoever's more willing to go to the wrestling in this fight is going to get at their opponent. So if it's Diego Ferreira that's on top of Rebecki, I think Rebecki gets up a couple of times, but if Ferreira keeps on going at it, I think Rebecki starts tiring a little bit. I think Ferreira starts being able to do good work, and the exact same vice versa. And this is what's leading me onto the Mateusz Rebecki side, because I think Rebecki is the more willing wrestler, which is key. I think Ferreira might play a little bit of jiu-jitsu off his back, which again I don't think that you'll see from Rebecki. I think if Rebecki's taken down, I think he'll try and get back up, whereas Ferreira, I think he'll play guard a little bit before trying to get back up, but at that point Rebecki's comfortable, he's settled on top, he's heavy on top, he's made Ferreira work, therefore it's going to be harder for Ferreira to get back up to his feet. But the key here is the wrestling. Like, the striking for me is going to be pretty close. The grappling, again, it all depends. Both fighters are elite grapplers, it just depends on who's on top. And I just feel that because of that, the wrestling comes into play. Rebecki for me is the better wrestler, is the more willing wrestler, the more likely to be relentless as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Mateusz Rebecki to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is intriguing as well. We've got Alex Bruce, Leroy Caceres versus Sean Woodson. Now, before I went into tape here, I was thinking, Sean Woodson, like minus 200 is definitely the right side here. Woodson's looked great. He's developing. I guess, again, especially against Charles Jourdain in his last fight, he was an underdog there. And, I wasn't one that predicted that fight correctly, nor did I bet it either, but I know a lot of people did cash Woodson as an underdog, and he looked phenomenal against Charles Jourdain. Charles Jourdain is no joke either. He's a fighter that's good everywhere, good striker, wrestler, grappler, and I know Woodson's got physical advantages against pretty much everybody that he fights. He's very tall. He's very long for the division, and he uses his range really well. He's got a real good boxing background as well, but carries his hands low, so he fires his boxing, the straight punches from the hip, which are harder to read for the opponent. So Woodson is really putting it all together. So I thought, minus 200, that's definitely the side. But the thing is with Alex Caceres, he's a real tricky opponent because he's so unassuming. He's been in the UFC as well, by the way, for way over 10 years. And at one point you were thinking, he's not UFC caliber, and then he's on and off with his performances, but he seems to have in the latter part of his career, he's definitely settled into the UFC, and he's not one of these fighters that's super dangerous or, is going to build into the rankings and go on a run for the title or anything like that. But Caceres is just really good everywhere, both offensively and defensively. One of those, master of none types of fighters, but it's difficult to beat somebody like that. And I bet quite heavily Giga Chikadze against Alex Caceres, and although Chikadze did rightfully win, that fight was way closer than A, it should have been, and B, that I anticipated it to be, because Chikadze just had this massive gap in skill in regards to striking quality, but Caceres was just there the entire fight, and I kind of feel like he's just an awkward fighter to fight. And even when you look at his movement, southpaw but switches stances, and he's constantly moving laterally, side to side, in and out of range. And Sean Woodson, I feel like he's going to have a difficult time just landing a ton of volume. I'm not saying he's not going to land on Caceres, because he absolutely is, but he's going to have a hard time landing a lot of volume on him because of the way Caceres moves. And Woodson, like I say, I feel like he's going to have the striking advantage here. I also think Woodson's going to have a wrestling and grappling advantage as well, because for as good as a striker he is, his wrestling and grappling is picking up very quickly. But it's just Caceres is just difficult to beat. He's an awkward fighter to fight against. So I kind of feel that although Woodson's the better fighter in my opinion, I kind of feel it's just going to, every single round, because again, it's very difficult to finish Caceres, and I don't see Caceres finishing Woodson. So I kind of feel like it's a fight that's likely to go the distance, but I feel that every single fight is just going to be really close. Woodson's probably going to edge at least 2 out of the 3 rounds, maybe all 3 rounds, but the fights could be that close that we know what the judges are like. It just wouldn't shock me if the judges are getting it a little bit, twisted here, or maybe the scorecards are all over the place and the fight becomes way closer than, what we thought it would be and what the betting line suggests. So, like I say, for me, I think that Sean Woodson's the better fighter. I'm much higher on him than I am on Alex Caceres. It's just Caceres is difficult to beat, makes fights that shouldn't be close, very close, and that's where you always enter in sketchy territory if it goes to the judges and you're leaving the fight, your bet, your prediction, whatever it is, in the hands of the judges, especially if you're backing Woodson at minus 200. Because if it goes to a close decision, it's not going to reflect that betting line. But in regards to the prediction itself, I'm picking Sean Woodson to win this fight. And in the next fight in the heavyweight division, this is the fight that I think everyone's going to be talking about. This is the fight that I think is going to be very split from a betting perspective amongst handicappers. And yeah, this is the one that I think that, you're going to have one side of a massive community that's going to be pointing fingers and laughing at the other side for taking a bad bet, they're going to say. But look, I said it yesterday on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. I can really come down on both sides on this fight, and I'm not going to sit on the fence, but what I am going to say is I think that you could justify value on either side. We've got Waldo Cortes-Acosta versus Robelis Despaigne, by the way. I didn't even give the fighter introduction. I got that excited about breaking it down. But look, I can come down on both sides here in regards to justifying value, because from Robelis Despaign's side, at the time of recording, you'll be able to get him anywhere from minus 170 to like minus 185. But there's a very high chance that Despaigne looks like a minus 400, minus 500 favourite after the fight. Because if he goes out there and destroys Waldo Cortes-Acosta and knocks him out early, or, batters him for 60 seconds and then knocks him out afterwards, then he is going to look like a minus 400, minus 500 fighter. So even though he's got question marks and, some red flags on him in regards to unknowns, if he goes out and does what I've just said and looks minus 400, minus 500, and you've bet him at minus 170 to minus 185, then man, you've just hit a real good bet. But on the flip side here, Waldo Cortes-Acosta, he's a proven UFC fighter. He can go 3 rounds. He's looked relatively durable. You can get him as an underdog for around plus 140-ish. Again, depending on where you look, you might get it a little bit worse or a little bit better. But the thing is with Despaigne is he hasn't gone past a round 1, and we haven't seen wrestling or grappling either from him. So, with Waldo Cortes-Acosta, he is somewhat well-rounded. Like I said, he has gone 3 rounds. His cardio does tend to hold up. He has shown decent durability. So if he weathers a storm here from Despaigne, takes Despaigne, into round 2, Despaigne suddenly huffing and puffing and, he's struggling, he's in a situation and in the UFC that he's never been in before, then Waldo Cortes-Acosta will drag him deep, either finish him late or win a decision, and then suddenly that plus 140 is going to look like Cortes-Acosta should have been a minus 150 favourite, and then that's also a really good bet with a ton of value. So this is what I mean. You can come down on both sides here, and it's ultimately how you think the fight is going to play out. And like I said, I'm not going to sit on the fence, so I'll tell you where I'm at with this. I think that, look, Despaigne, the issue that obviously everyone's going to have with him is, he's 5-0 in MMA. His last 4 fights, I think the average fight, sorry, not the average fight time, I think the last 4 fights, entire fight time put together is like 37 seconds or something ridiculous like that. He's even got a 3-second knockout in there, which is just crazy. But that's the issue that everyone's going to have with Despaigne, because what happens if it goes into round 2? But the thing is, Despaigne was a Olympic bronze medalist in the 2012 games in London in Taekwondo. So it's a combat sport that he was a bronze medalist in. But the thing is, with the Olympic Games, it's no joke. Like, you have to be an elite level athlete, and it's a combat sport that he will have had to have had elite level cardio for. And I know MMA is different. I get it. And if he starts having to wrestle and grapple, he's using a different cardio system to what he does or what he would do with striking. But Waldo Cortes-Acosta, he's attempted 1 takedown in 6 UFC fights, and he failed on that takedown. He's predominantly a striker himself. I'm also not massively high on Cortes-Acosta as a prospect either, whereas Robelis Despaigne, the athleticism's off the charts, the power's off the charts. He slipped against Josh Parisian in his UFC debut, and then as Parisian tried to take advantage of that and, put pressure on him, he sprung back up to his feet like he was a 125-pound flyweight fighter, not a 260-pound heavyweight, and then started firing punches while shooting on the back foot and ended up clipping Parisian and knocking him out. So look, the level of athleticism he's got, the power that he's got, huge reach, he's absolutely massive. He's UFC's new heavyweight toy. They're not going to want that toy to be broken. So I'm kind of on the Robelis Despaigne side, and I do think that when you're forcing me to go to which betting side that I think is more likely to happen, I think it's more likely that Despaigne ends up looking like a minus 400, minus 500 favourite than I do Cortes-Acosta looking like any type of favourite in this fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Robelis Despaigne to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Chase Hooper versus Viacheslav Borshchev. And it's an interesting fight, this, because we've got a fighter in Chase Hooper at 24 years old that is now more experienced in MMA than the 32-year-old Viacheslav Borshchev. However, the key point there is MMA. Obviously, Viacheslav Borshchev came from the kickboxing scene and has had like 200, or apparently it's recorded that he's had like 200 plus, kickboxing fights. So yeah, Borshchev is more experienced in combat sports, but Chase Hooper is the more experienced MMA fighter. But at 24 years old, I still think Hooper's absolutely nowhere near where he should be because at 24 years old, you're still in a real, tough learning curve. So should is the wrong word, but he's nowhere near where he will be in the future if he keeps training, gets the right people around him, and continues to develop. Like Hooper's room for development is ridiculously vast, and that's the majority of that is in the striking, because his grappling is, it's off the charts. He's a very, very good grappler, tough to deal with, both offensively and defensively is absolutely fine. The wrestling could use a little bit of work as well, because he is one of these jiu-jitsu fighters where his jiu-jitsu is so good, but his wrestling hasn't quite caught up to it. A little bit like Mackenzie Dern in a way, although Dern is improving, but the wrestling, as a good jiu-jitsu player in MMA, your wrestling's got to be good. You've got to work on your wrestling, because that is your door to taking the fight to where you want it to be. If you're this world-class jiu-jitsu artist, but you can't get the fight down to the mat, then you're going to struggle. So Hooper's got some room for development. Now, from Borshchev's side, his room for development needs to be within his takedown defense, or maybe not so much his takedown defense, but his get-up game. And the thing is, Borshchev is okay with defending some takedowns. If he's taken down, depending on the opponent against him, he can get back up to his feet. But if he fights someone that's a good grappler, then they can hold him down. Or even if he gets back up, if he's fighting a good wrestler, they'll keep getting him down. And this is where I think that this fight is so intriguing stylistically, because even though I feel that Chase Hooper's grappling is absolutely light years ahead of Borshchev's, I think the biggest gap in skill is the striking here. If Hooper cannot get this fight down to the mat, he is going to get lit up ridiculously. He's going to get chewed up on the feet. I think Borshchev could stop him with low kicks. I think he could stop him with body shots. I think he could stop him with, strikes to the head, knocking him out. Borshchev's striking, I think, is compared to Hooper's, it's like I said, that gap in skill is ridiculous. But if Hooper gets Borshchev down, then Borshchev's going to have a real problem on the mat. I just don't think that Borshchev's going to be able to get up easily against Hooper, or if he does try to get up, I think it's going to be one of them where he sort of half shows the back and then Hooper sticks his hooks in. But the thing on Borshchev's side here is, because he's with Uriah Faber, the Team Alpha Male guys, or at least he was the last time I looked, I feel like he's going to have a real good camp here in preparation for the grappling of Hooper, the defensive wrestling as well. They've got a real good program at Alpha Male, so I kind of feel like Borshchev's going to be better prepared in this fight than Hooper. And if Borshchev can just keep this fight on the feet for a little bit, I just think Borshchev just chews Hooper up. And even when Hooper's coming in and shooting takedowns, I think some of them might start to get a little bit desperate. And again, I don't think Hooper's got the best wrestling yet. It definitely is something that I think we'll see in the future. But right now, I just think that he's going to struggle to maybe get Borshchev down or to get in close, because every time Hooper comes forward, I think Borshchev's just going to absolutely piece him up. So yeah, look, again, it's a bit like what I said with Derrick Lewis. The problem is, with Lewis, if you get caught by that one punch, then it changes everything. The problem here with Hooper and Borshchev is, if Hooper does get Borshchev down, then Borshchev, that's Hooper's puncher's chance if he gets Borshchev down, is what I'm trying to say. But outside of that, I think we're more likely to see a striking display from Borshchev than we are Hooper hitting plenty of takedowns and getting loads of top control time. So for those reasons, I'm picking Viacheslav Borshchev to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is one that might surprise a couple of people with how I break this fight down, but we've got Terrance McKinney versus Esteban Ribovics. Now, the one thing that I want to cover straight away with Terrance McKinney, because it's become a little bit of a general consensus that if Terrance McKinney gets out of round one, then he's going to lose every single fight that he fights. And I don't think that's true. And look, just to potentially contradict what I've just said there, like, if you look at the statistics of fights that Terrance McKinney's in that gets out of round one, he generally doesn't win those fights. And look, I get that, but you've got to put more context into what's happening in these fights. So, like, take the Sadikov fight, for example, okay? So, McKinney has a great round one, takes him down, takes the back, controls pretty much all round one. He comes out in round two and he tries to do the same thing. Sadikov hits a good scramble. And bear in mind, Sadikov's training with the likes of Aljamain Sterling and Merab Dewar-Lishvili. He's going to have a good level of, grappling, MMA grappling. So Sadikov hits a scramble and he gets into this, like, crazy rare position that I think I have seen it before, but it's very, very rare, where he's actually trapping McKinney's arm behind his back, almost in like a half like Kimura type of position with his own leg. So McKinney has his back taken and he only has one arm to defend both strikes and submissions. And of course he gets submitted. Like, this at this level in the UFC, fighters don't not capitalize on those positions. But it wasn't as if McKinney had come out in that round two and he was completely gassed and demoralised and, emptied the tank, tried to finish Sadikov and it didn't happen. Like, McKinney came out in that second round as he started the first round completely fine. It's just Sadikov just so happened to, hit a good scramble and get into that rare position where he traps his arm and submits him. So, of course, from a record and statistic perspective, it's another fight where McKinney doesn't win after a fight goes out of round one. And another fight to talk about from McKinney that went out of round one that he lost, Ismail Bonfim. So again, Terrance McKinney goes out of round one and he doesn't win, but look, Bonfim was battering him anyway. Like, it's one of those fights where he was already losing the fight when it went into round two. It's not as if he had an amazing round one and then came out and gassed out in round two and got finished. Like, he was getting beaten by Bonfim. So it doesn't matter whether it was a finish in round one or a finish in round three. He was losing the fight. So again, it's not a situation where the statement of if it goes out of round one, he loses, which implies that he doesn't have the cardio or abilities out of round one. The only fight that he's gassed out in horrifically in the UFC was the Drew Dober fight. And look, what happened in that Drew Dober fight is he took a massive step up in competition on a ton of hype. I think it was short notice as well. He fought Drew Dober, who was levels above him, somehow managed to drop Dober in that first round and went balls to the wall to try and finish him. That's what Terrance McKinney should have tried to do in that type of fight, because if McKinney had sort of relaxed a little bit, let Dober back up and tried to beat him skill for skill, point for point, he loses the fight. McKinney had his opportunity to beat a high-ranked opponent or a high-level opponent in Drew Dober in the UFC, and the only way that McKinney beats Dober, in my opinion, in that situation is by jumping all over him and emptying every single aspect of your gas tank on Dober to try and finish that fight. And he did exactly that, but he didn't finish him, and therefore he gassed out and got finished later in the round, which is to be expected against somebody the level of Dober. So actually the whole fact of, or the statement of if McKinney goes out of round one, he loses, and, it's because of cardio, or it's not. Like, it just so happens that, certain events have formulated and he's not been able to get those finishes out of round one. But it's not because he's got a bad gas tank or bad fight IQ. He's just been beaten. Like I say, Sadikov hit a beautiful scramble and got a perfect position, and Bonfim was already beating him anyway. So, look, I know I've spent a lot of time on that, but it's just something that I feel really strongly about. That statement of McKinney loses going out of round one is, you've got to put some context on that, because it doesn't paint the full picture just by saying that statement and nothing else after it. But then the ironic thing in this fight is one of Ribovics' biggest strengths as a fighter is his cardio. Like, this dude is built for 5 rounds. So, like, again, you're gonna be hearing it. Look, Ribovics has got insane cardio. McKinney can't win out of round one, so therefore Ribovics must win the fight at a very high clip. And again, I disagree with that statement as well. Like, I feel that from a striking perspective, both of these fighters have got good striking, technically. Both of them have got a ton of power. Both of them have got, decent combinations and decent volume. Ribovics slightly higher volume. But both these fighters, from a striking perspective, are very well matched. Then when you get into the wrestling and grappling, I think Terrance McKinney's the better wrestler. He's got a wrestling background. Ribovics has been taken down I think 14 times in his last 2 fights. And yes, Ribovics does a decent job of defending some takedowns and he can get back up to his feet. But again, once the fight hits the mat from a grappling perspective, I think McKinney's going to be better on top than what Ribovics is on bottom. So this fight actually, the ironic thing about this is this fight actually might come down to the cardio, because if McKinney doesn't get Ribovics out of there maybe in the first round and a half, I think that he might, a little bit of tiredness might start setting in. Not anything out of the ordinary, just he's a natural human being, and if he's working hard he's going to tire, and I think Ribovics' cardio will be better the longer the fight goes on. But even if McKinney's already won 2 rounds by that point, then Ribovics might win a 3rd round and McKinney just needs to survive and not get finished. So I kind of feel like it's going to be that type of fight. I think McKinney's the better fighter here. I definitely don't think as soon as McKinney gets out if this fight gets out of round 1, McKinney's automatically lost. I don't agree with that. I think it's a good competitive fight between 2 fighters that have got good striking, good power, good technical abilities, but I think McKinney's got that second path to victory in regards to the wrestling and the grappling, where Ribovics has been got at before. I mean, Camuela Kirk spent a full round on Ribovics in round 1 in the exact same way that McKinney spent round 1 against Nazim Sadikov. So, I think McKinney's much more live in this fight than some people might give him credit for. And like I said, although I disagree with the sentiment of the statement of outside of round 1 McKinney loses, the irony is it might come down to cardio, but that's not because I don't think McKinney's got horrific cardio. It's just that's one of Ribovics' biggest strengths and traits as a fighter. But still, I do like the fact that McKinney's got a second layer of path to victory here, and for those reasons I'm picking Terrance McKinney to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Tabatha Ricci versus the returning Tecia Pennington. So for those that aren't aware, this is Tecia Torres. Again, the long-term fans of the UFC will know who Torres is. She's just had a change of surname. She looks like she's taken Raquel Pennington's surname. So yeah, I nearly said Torres, and again, Tecia Pennington, she's coming back from having a baby, I believe, which is always a very interesting talking point when breaking fights down, because just off the top of my head, I feel like a lot of the women that come back to fighting after pregnancy and having a baby, I kind of feel that first fight never really goes well for them, or more often than not they lose it. But like I said, I would love to have the actual numbers and statistics to see if that point is somewhat proven, because that's just what it feels like. And again, I'm only going off a few fights that I've got on the top of my head. One of the latest ones actually was Germaine de Randamie just a few weeks ago, and again I thought that was a real good fight for Germaine de Randamie. I'm sure she was the one that was carrying the baby in her relationship, so I'm sure she was the one that was pregnant, and again it looked like a great stylistic fight for her, and she had some world-class elite skill set and abilities within a striking, and she didn't win the fight. She didn't get over the line. So again, I'm not just basing this just on that one fight, but there's been fights historically. I've been watching this sport for way over 10 years, so I've seen it quite a lot, and yeah, it's just something that I feel like a lot of these women that come back to fighting after pregnancy and having a baby, just that first fight back just doesn't seem to go their way. But look, from a stylistic perspective, Tecia Pennington has had some time off. There's going to be some ring rust there. Like I say, she spent time with her family. And also, just why I'm talking about women and the women fighters and the pregnancy and the babies, like the shape that these women get their bodies back into after pregnancy is fucking unbelievable. So props to every single one of them out there, because like you look on Instagram and Pennington has got abs that some people can only even dream of, and this is after coming back after she's had a baby. So man, like just crazy respect there. But in stylistically here, I think that it's a well-matched fight. Like both fighters are decent strikers. They've both got speed. They've both, got good accuracy within the strikes. They've varied the strikes between the punches and the kicks as well. Now, the one thing that I would have said a few fights ago is that Tecia Pennington would have been an insanely more skilled striker, but Ricci seems to have made some real good improvements in her striking. She potentially softly dropped Lupita Godinez twice in their fight, and again, like that wasn't something that Ricci was known for. She's always been known for getting fights down to the mat, using a jiu-jitsu to blanket opponents, grapple on top, run the clock down while striking, looking for submission opportunities. That was her MO. That was her bread and butter. But now it seems like Ricci can strike. And she does have a Muay Thai background, granted, but it's not as... I don't think it's as vast as what the judo and the jiu-jitsu was for Ricci. But because of those improvements in her striking, I now think that she can be competitive with Tecia Pennington striking. And when it comes to the wrestling and grappling, look, I think the wrestling's going to be close in this fight, but I love the way that Ricci has the ability to lift a single leg and trip the standing leg and get on top, so she's not wasting a ton of energy shooting single legs and double legs and trying to drive through and chain wrestle. And I think that type of wrestler against Pennington defends it perfectly. But a big element of Pennington's striking game is the kicks. And I just think that Ricci does a good job of catching kicks specifically. So I think that either Pennington throws kicks here, Ricci catches kicks and gets takedowns, or Pennington doesn't throw kicks because of that, sticks to boxing only, and Ricci will be able to box with the best of them. So I do think that stylistically it's a fight that maybe slightly favours Ricci. Then when you look at the grappling, I think, look, if Pennington gets put on her back, she might get up once or twice. But if Ricci really goes to the well with this and really hits numerous takedowns, I think it will get to the point where Pennington, the get-ups do slow down a little bit. Ricci does start spending a little bit more time on top. But look, straight up jiu-jitsu, I think Ricci's very, very slightly better. The wrestling here, I think it's going to be close. That's the aspect that's very intriguing. But because of the style of striking that Pennington has with the kicks, I think that plays into Ricci's takedown game. And then with the striking, I think the striking's very close as well. So with the slight advantages in the jiu-jitsu and also the slight stylistic advantage that I feel that is going to be on the path of Ricci because of the kicks of Pennington, I'm on the side of Ricci. I do think that Ricci can get over the line and get a good name on a record and continue up the rankings. And also, like I say, the other side of it is Ricci's been super active. Pennington's had a lot of time off. I think there's upside here on Ricci. So for those reasons, I'm picking Tabatha Ricci to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Trey Waters versus Billy Goff. Really interesting. I've seen a little bit of back and forth with this fight as well. People on either side here. Obviously, Billy Goff as the underdog is going to open the eyes or instantly get the interest of handicappers because of that plus money. And I was exactly the same. Before I went into tape, I saw the underdog in Billy Goff. I know that Goff's a gamer. He's got good cardio, good pressure, wrestling background. So as soon as I saw that plus money, I thought, right, okay, I've got to look into this. Very interested in Goff. But I came out on the other side with Trey Waters. And the reason being is, look, Waters is like 6'5", but he uses his reach really well. He's very similar to how Woodson fights, although I think Woodson is a much better quality fighter, at least right now. But Waters does a really good job of, just understanding his height and range, which some fighters can spend an entire career of being huge and way bigger than their opponents and not figure out how to be as effective as they possibly can be. But Waters does seem to do a good job of it. His counter-striking's really good. Hands are low as well. So, he's gauging his range. He knows he can strike from the outside safely, so he can carry his hands low. And if his opponent's shooting, a blast double from a little bit further out, then the hands are already low to get under the arms to defend the takedown. So Waters knows how to use his range. Good counters, powerful as well. And the thing with Goff, look, Goff's, like I say, he's an absolute gamer. He'll be in the face of his opponents. He'll try and push a pace, close the distance, try and land shots to the body, to the head. Like, he's a good fighter, but he gets hit too much. And I think that would be okay if he wasn't fighting someone that was 6'5" for this division. Because, look, Goff's durable as well, but at some point that durability is going to crack, and I just feel that Waters is going to land a lot of hard shots in this fight as Goff is trying to come forward and close the distance. And if that does happen, then Goff, a little bit of frustration might start setting in, and he might start to be a little bit more reckless, take more chances, and at that point Waters just sees everything really well in front of him, and I think Goff's just going to continue to get hit with hard shots. So yeah, look, I really like Goff as a fighter. I think he'll win fights in the UFC. He's entertaining, but yeah, I think the height, the length, the reach, and the fact that Waters does such a good job at range and seeing everything in front of him really favours him in this fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Trey Waters to win this fight. And in the next fight, I'm not sure why this fight's so low down on the card. Maybe it gets moved, I'm not sure. But we've got Jake Hadley versus Charles Johnson. And I think this has got the makings to be a real fight that's flying under the radar on this event, on this card. I think that Jake Hadley has had some real difficult fights. Yes, he's taken a couple of losses, but he's taken losses against real good guys. Like the last loss that he took was against Cody Durden. Cody Durden's one of these fighters that is just gritty, grindy, relentless wrestling, pace. He's got good striking as well. And also a fighter that absolutely destroyed Charles Johnson in their fight also. So both fighters share that loss with Cody Durden. But like I say, Cody Durden's a good fighter. Then the other fight that Hadley lost was Alon Nascimento, who I think is one of the most underrated guys in the division. I bet Nascimento in that fight is like a plus 175 underdog, I think. Like, the dude just got real good wrestling and grappling skills. And this is the thing with Hadley. Jake Hadley, if he can't be the better wrestler and grappler in fights, he's going to struggle a little bit, because if he's not the better wrestler and grappler, that means he's getting taken down. But even that fight with Cody Durden, I swear he would have tapped pretty much like 99% of any other fighters in that fight with Cody Durden, apart from Cody Durden. Like, even though Durden was doing, good work on top of Hadley, Hadley was very dangerous in that fight. And this is where I think Hadley's going to have a good fight here, because the striking here is going to be close. Kind of slightly favour Hadley with it, but very slightly. But the wrestling and grappling here, even though Charles Johnson's got a level of wrestling and grappling, I think Hadley's better, especially with the grappling. Hadley's a very tricky fighter to deal with on the mat, and unless you're a world-class grappler, you're going to have problems with Hadley. And even if you are a world-class grappler, you're still going to have some problems with Hadley. Like, he wasn't all plain sailing for Alon Nascimento. He had to mind his P's and Q's. And then, like I said, with Durden, Jake Hadley almost had Durden out. So I think that Charles Johnson is going to have a problem when this fight hits the mat. I think Hadley's going to be the better wrestler, the better grappler. Those are the two key factors here. And then the striking, relatively close, slight edge on Jake Hadley in my opinion. So I think Hadley is better in every area, the striking slightly, but the wrestling and grappling, I don't think Charles Johnson is at that world-class elite level that is going to be able to nullify Hadley's grappling game. And I think Hadley's going to be super dangerous in this fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Jake Hadley to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Jared Gooden versus Kevin Jousset. And yeah, look, again, this is going to be one of those fights that I'm not sure how long it's going to go. I think at some point, one of these fighters is going to find a finish. Jared Gooden's one of these guys that, he'll win fights that you don't expect him to win, but then he'll lose fights where you expect him to win. Like, he's one of these fighters that he'll win a couple of fights in a row that you think are difficult fights for him, and then suddenly you're like, okay, Jared Gooden, he's on a roll. He's now got a fight in front of him that he absolutely should win now on a win streak, and then he goes out there and doesn't quite perform. So there's a little bit of inconsistency there, in my opinion. Nothing too crazy. Like, I think he's a good fighter. He's dangerous, well-rounded. But with Kevin Jousset is a fighter that I'm just not that sold on quite yet, but I'm very open-minded to it. Like, he's got good qualities about him. You can see that, he's a good kickboxer. Trains with the guys out at City Kickboxing, I believe, with like your Israel Adesanya, your Carlos Ulberg. So he's got good training partners, especially for his style that is, a tallish, long striker. And I just feel in this fight, Gooden's going to be the one that's trying to make it ugly, that's trying to technically brawl. But then you've got Kevin Jousset that's wanting to keep everything pretty clean and, looking to catch Gooden as he's coming in, counter-striking style. And I just think that it favours Jousset. In regards to the betting line, I do think it's a little bit wide. It should be shorter, but I get the Kevin Jousset favourite aspect of this fight. I think he is rightfully favoured. And like I say, I feel that Gooden is going to be a dog in this fight, but Jousset is going to be able to keep it clean, keep his strikes clean, good counters, and be able to, put some good strikes on Gooden, potentially finish him as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Kevin Jousset to win this fight. And in the next fight, the final fight to break down on the card, which means it's the first fight on the night, we've got JJ Aldrich versus Veronica Hardy. Now, I've been having a real difficult time with this one from a prediction perspective, because I kind of think, and look, if I'm wrong here, I'm wrong, like, that's fine, but I kind of think that the wrong fighter is favoured here, the wrong fighter's the underdog, and I'm happy to be proven wrong. The reason why I'm having difficulty, though, is because, look, Veronica Hardy's the favourite. and I just don't know why. But I understand that she is making improvements. She is developing. She's not the fighter that she was when she was Macedo, for a lack of a better phrase. But I do think that there's elements of a game. In fact, all elements of a game are improving, and that's what makes this fight difficult, because JJ Aldrich is a very stoic fighter. She's decent everywhere. Good striking, decent wrestling, decent grappling. Like, she's very, very well rounded, and she's a sturdy fighter, tough to beat. She's been around for years. If you're not ready for like the UFC rankings, then you're not going to beat her. But if you are ready for the rankings, then you're the type of fighter that will go through her. So yeah, it's just tough, especially when you look at the form and, you know, what both fighters have been doing recently. You've got JJ Aldrich that's on a 2-fight winning streak, and sure, one of those fighters is Na Liang, and look, Na Liang's a game fighter, she'll always come game, but after round one, you know, the irony of me saying this, but after round one she normally starts to fade a little bit and then gets finished. And is she UFC caliber? Probably not, but JJ Aldrich's last win is Montana De La Rosa, who I think is actually a decent fighter. You know, is she a fighter that's going to hit the rankings or climb towards a title fight? I don't think so, but she's got good qualities, decent striking, wrestling background, and again, JJ Aldrich handled her. Then you look at, on the other side, with Veronica Hardy, she's on a 2-fight winning streak. However, one of those fights was Juliana Miller, who, to be fair, she looked good against. That was the fight where we really started to see some developments. But Juliana Miller, it's questionable whether she's UFC caliber. And then in the last fight, Jamie Lynn Horth, she went to a split decision with her. Then in the fight before the last two, because she's on a 2-fight winning streak, she lost to Bea Malecki, who I don't even know if she's even in the UFC anymore. So yeah, it's a tough one. Like I say, I can appreciate that Hardy's making some developments, but it's hard to look past Aldrich, who hasn't really looked terrible. You know what you're going to get with her, and she's a fighter that's always going to be in and around this level in the UFC. So yeah, happy to be proven wrong on this one. Like I say, if Hardy's continued to make developments and she goes through JJ Aldrich in this fight, then yeah, fair play to her. But for this prediction, the sake of the podcast, I'm picking JJ Aldrich to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. As always, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening, whether that's on one of our podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, all the good places where that's at. Or if you're on YouTube, tuning in. If you are on YouTube, please subscribe to the MMA Play 365 YouTube channel. It really helps the channel. And if you want to leave a comment, tell me where we disagree, tell me who you're betting on, then you absolutely can do. And again, it all helps the algorithm as well. It is me that replies to everybody. I do try every single week to get back to all the replies. So yeah, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for the support as always. And remember, one last time, if you are wanting to jump into the action this weekend, then you can do so at MMA Play 365. You've got all the handicapper betting advice, fun parlays, recommended bets with full breakdowns, full written breakdowns, and then you've got the official bets that I'm physically playing with my money as well, along with all the predictions, all the percentage predictions from Bayes AI, which is our UFC prediction software, and you can find that all in one subscription, and that's at MMAplay365.com. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I'm Newsom. I'll see you again next week.